Hello and welcome to this special bonus episode of The Dairy Edge. Teagasc are running a weekly Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, which is also being made available as a podcast. On this week's webinar, John Douglas and John McCabe join Stuart Childs to discuss management coming out of drought or near drought conditions on farm.
So John is dealing with a scenario where we're really trying to build from nothing. And then I suppose John McCabe is covering, working on the Arrivo joint programme in the western side of the country, covering Galway, Mayo, Sligo, Leitrim, Donegal, that kind of area. And obviously they have a very different picture up there where they have gotten a lot more rain. Indeed, John, you were telling me earlier on in the year it was even tricky enough at the start of the summer because of ground conditions, which wasn't something that we were suffering with down in the south at the time. So, but again, I suppose, and John, you'll pick up on it in a minute, like even though things are going well, people are a little bit behind target, even with good growth conditions. So you're going to pick up on that in a minute. But first, John Douglas will come to you in terms of the angle from the dry side of the house, we'll say. So there's a lot of farms, I suppose, since probably around the 15th or 16th of August, depending on whether they got rain or not, have either gone ticked along a little bit, I suppose, or have actually fallen off a cliff almost, depending on whether they got the rain or not. So you're just going to pick up on a few points there, I suppose. We're fingers crossed now everywhere and toes and everything that we will get rain at the weekend, albeit looking like it could be very heavy downpours and stuff like that, but we'll take anything that's coming in the short term. What's that going to mean for us, John, then as well going forward in terms of building cover, what are we going to do around management, etc. So you have a few slides that you're going to share with us there, and then we'll have a conversation about them after that.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, sure. Look, it's a varying degree. It's like any time when we get into drought, some parts of the country, even the drought-stricken areas, do get some heavier soils even within those areas might grow on a little bit. And even what I've seen there in the last week is that, and I don't know, it's possibly something to do with the grass moving from that reproductive state where maybe it's under a lot of pressure to try to produce a seed head. It's sort of changed now, maybe back to vegetative, and it has, even in drought-stricken areas, has actually greened up a little bit. There's a bit of a greening coming, and I'm not saying there's any much feed on the ground, but it gives me good I suppose hope that when the rain does come at the weekend, whatever level of rain we get, that it should kick on a bit quicker. That it's not going to grow off a dead looking base. It should have a little bit more of a kick to it. So that's a positive, I suppose, if I can take something from it. But yeah, so look, growth rates have been dropping. Sure, look, I'm based. I'm living in Wicklow, and I cover sort of Leinster region, so I get to see a lot of maybe the drier areas of the country. And for a lot of areas like have got very little significant rainfall. Probably even during July, some areas mightn't have got much rainfall. So, we're looking at a case where soil moisture deficits now are gone, between 55 and 80, I think was the report at the weather at the weekend. But I'd say like their general guidelines, some farms are probably even gone beyond that, and that's where you talk about farm cover, the level of grass on the farm has dropped off a cliff, and the typical grass growth that we would see maybe in 4 or 5 days of recovery usually is taking maybe 3 or 4 weeks to grow. Do you know that sort of way? So it's really bad in some instances. Okay, but yeah, look, we will move on anyway. So grass growth and predicted grass growth, yeah, as I said, soil moisture deficits are high. So I suppose maybe I should explain that. So basically that's taken in the top 4 inches or the top 100 mil, and if you had 100 mil soil moisture deficit, basically there's no moisture in the top 4 inches. So obviously, plants can't really survive without that, especially the shadow rooting plants. But we're talking about 55 to 80. Once we go over 50, the growth does drop. So between maybe 25 and 50 of a soil moisture deficit, instead of growing 60s, 70s, you might be back down to 40s, 50s. But then like once it goes over 50 of a soil moisture deficit, you could go back down to maybe the 20s or something like that, and depending on the intensity of the heat and the sunshine, I suppose. And even this week we've got a lot of some of the days earlier on in the week, they were very hot and heavy going. Like we were down in Johnstown Castle there yesterday. I even got a bit of burnt myself, and so so it was intense. But the soil temperatures are above normal, which is good if we're going to get rain. that means that we should get a little bit of a kick. So it is possible, I suppose, with that rain, maybe we get some good sunshine as well. So that'll help drive growth a little bit. But look, growth is varying anywhere from somewhere even below 10 on farms up to even farms that are, have high soil moisture deficits. Some of them have grown 30s, 40s in the last week. And I think that's something to do maybe that greening effect that I was talking about, maybe a transition. And there are also farmers are putting it down to a lot of heavy dews over the last couple of weeks as well. I suppose as the evening times are starting to cool down, we're getting these heavy dews and maybe putting some of it down to that. So we can see here the predicted. Sorry, I won't get my mouse here. I've lost my mouse. It's just over the map for me. Sorry. Yeah, so the predicted there for Leinster for next week, based on rainfall, I suppose of between 1 to 2 inches in a lot of cases. Based on that rainfall, Leinster is sort of predicted to grow 34. So look, as a guide, for farms that are growing in around 10, 15, there probably will be a jump in growth next week after the rain. But as to the extent of that, it's going to vary a lot depending on the rainfall, and that's why it's making it so hard to predict at the minute. So
yeah. And like John, I suppose will people be a bit surprised maybe even to see that there's a suggestion that we'll say the average growth now, it's very important to point out the average growth for Munster is 45 for this week. It's nearly hard to see.
That's for the predicted with the rainfall, Stuart. So that's based off the data that we have from weather models. Look, we all know that they can change as well. So if that has changed, well then the figure there on the screen will change. So but even I suppose if you look at the grass growth over the last week, sure, it's up 30 something. But like that's taking areas maybe Munster takes in some heavy ground, I suppose, along the west coast as well. And areas of the southwest that have got a good bit of rainfall, I think, are sufficient rainfall, we'll say, to grow grass. So, you're mixing the two of them there, yeah. But,
so John, I suppose moving on then and looking at, we'll say, I suppose the impact of drought in previous years and what's it likely to do this year. I suppose everybody's expecting a bounce, but is that something that we can actually expect?
Yeah, so if we look, the green line here is this year, right? Last year is the red line. The average, long-term average is the blue, and that grey line there, I suppose, just for reference, is 2018, because I suppose we compare drought years, it's nearly all compared to 2018, really. That was the big one. So, if we're looking at even this year over the long-term average, there's only maybe a period in May where it really got above the line, maybe perhaps for a week in July as well. So look, for the rest of the time, it's actually been below the long-term average, and a lot of that's probably related to soil moisture deficits throughout the summertime. But I suppose what we can see with 2018, by this stage, 1st of September, we'd nearly recovered back to normal with terms of growth rates. And a lot of people think 2018 finished up a really, really strong growth in the back end, but as we can see there, it's only just about normal. So we didn't get a huge kick. Maybe it was the fact that there was nothing really growing all summer, and then we got such a growth then that made an illusion that a group was growing more. Also, I'd say the thing was there was great ground conditions in the back end of 2018, which made it possible to actually graze for longer for some farmers. And the swards, because they had been clean bare, I suppose, they were very leafy. So, the utilization of the grass on sward might have been higher as well. So that would make the grass last a bit longer, So if we look at this year, we're already, I suppose we were starting to drop this year when 2018 was starting to perk up, So we're still dropping, obviously, in some cases. Well, probably most cases we're still dropping. So where does that lead us now? It's if you look at that graph, you're saying, Jesus, the back end's going to be very short, and are we going to get a big kick and a big bounce? And things are against us. So the possibilities or the potential to get a big kick are diminishing, I suppose, every week, really. So
and the other side of it, I suppose, John, is the kick is really just actually a recovery to normal growth levels in reality,
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to grow. I know last September was one of the growthiest Septembers probably we ever had. It grew more grass in September than it did in May. This year, is it looking like that? No, it's not, because we're not going to get rain. Maybe it's not going to start kicking in for maybe a week's time. you're a week down before you even begin. So, and the soil moisture deficits are still going to be high, even with 1 to 2 inches of rain. If we do get it, they're still going to be high. Okay, so
and I suppose this is what you're going to show here now, is the difference between 2018 and we'll say 1995 scenario. So the risk is that we actually get the rain the coming week and we go back to dry conditions potentially, whereas it was quite favourable, as people will be able to see there by your chart, in terms of that there was rainfall throughout August and throughout September and October in 2018 as well, which kept the fuel in the tank basically to continue the growth.
Yeah, we had from the water quality samples, like there was a lot of nitrogen even in the water and stuff, and like a lot of that would have came more from the background nitrogen release from the soil rather than maybe fertilizer put on, although that would have contributed to it definitely. But I suppose people have been more judicious this year, I suppose, as well, with fertilizer. We'll probably come to that a bit later on. But if we look at 2018, you can see it's on a par with our long-term average. So there was no real big kick, I suppose, if you like to call it. And as you say, the kick was basically getting back to normal. But that was based on a lot of rainfall throughout August to get us back there by September.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the next one then is the
next one is probably similar to this year.
Scenario, John, I suppose, is it?
Yeah. So this is taken from Moore Park in 1995. So we can see the measuring grass has come back a long way if we look at it. So if we're looking at here, like there was rainfall in late July. I'm not even sure. I don't think this year we got much rainfall in late July. So we're probably even a little bit behind 95, if you like. Maybe we got a bit more rain in August in certain places. Maybe a bit more than the 7 mil. So, but there was very, very little during August, I suppose, in 95. They got it. It looks like it's actually working out similar in terms of, the end of this week there will be rain, or into this weekend and early next week there will be rain. So by mid-September, possibly could have sort of 15 mils again, 20 mils, hopefully a bit more. Long-term average again isn't looking hectic for us for now for the rainfall. So it's looking similar to 95, and which basically we're all basing this on the moisture as the limiting factor, okay? And we probably, we'd all agree it is. We have plenty of light, we have plenty of heat, there's probably plenty of nutrients in the soil. It's just a moisture issue. So if we're looking here at the peak, it came on the 21st of October back in 95, and it grew 27. Okay. Now we obviously would hope with the advancements we've made in grass breeding that we'd have reseeds that are fresh seeds that would be capable of doing maybe 1.5 times that, but you're still only talking about maybe a peak of 40. Whereas on a normal September you're probably talking about growing 60s. Some farms will grow 40 for the whole of October, so we're maybe talking about it maybe peaking at 40 for a week or two. So we're really, I'm not painting a great picture here, I suppose, in terms of the grass supply for the autumn time. And I really think farmers need to plan now, obviously based off where they are now, and to how severe it would be. But definitely a fodder budget is essential. It's not a necessity or nice to have this year. I think it's a critical thing to have, because it'll help make your decisions based on, maybe what cows you're going to feed or what you're going to feed them, etc. So look, we will get some response at some stage to moisture, but as I said, every week that goes by now, that kick or that bounce we're going to get from it is going to reduce.
Yeah, so basically we're looking at all we're hoping to achieve in reality is that we would come back to the long-term average growth rate, and the further out in the month that we go off to get to that, the lower that peak is going to be, basically.
Yeah. So the best we could hope for is to get back to average, I think.
Yeah, okay. So moving on there, John, because I know you're going to in a minute.
So we move on to
this question has come up a bit now. So there's people saying, Justin Coughlin is after saying that given that there was fertilizer probably sprayed maybe in anticipation of rain in places, and it didn't come, and it's more than likely not fully utilised, is there merit in holding off, or what's the best advice in relation to the fertilizer?
Yeah, in very dry areas that have not grown, like if you've put out like fertilizer and the cover that's on the paddock now is only 600-700, well, like that's only half a crop of grass and normally that we would require, and actually it's a bit less than half for this time of year as we're building covers. So therefore, like, there should be at least half that fertilizer still there from the last application. And if we look back, depending on your growth over the summertime, every farmer will know their own farm and how the farm is growing over the summertime. But if we just look at the national average, it's been below the average for the whole summer, really. So there should be a good build up of background nitrogen, plus the stuff that went out maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago. I would think, unless there's 1 or 2 paddocks on the farm that seem to be growing better because they're heavy, most of the farm, in terms of the response you're going to get, it's not going to warrant a response, warrant an application of fertilizer. Now, again, if you go back maybe past sort of 3 weeks to 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks ago, so some people put out their last round of fertilizer, based on the rain that we might get over the next week, are you going to put some out? The answer would probably be yes, but a lighter amount. Now, we can talk about this from a growing grass point of view and having grass from the autumn. And if we want to go behind it with the figures, we can see here that if we put out, this is based on 30 kilos of nitrogen going out, and it's based on, I think it's 4 years data previous to 2018. So 2018 is on the chart, but it's not the 2018 year. It's only the year it was published, but it was cross locations. So grass dry matter yield response to fertilizer and nitrogen, it was up, I think, 27 for early August, about 19 for September, and it's about 10 for October, just for reference. We don't spread any in October, but just for reference. So it's basically, dropping by 10 every month, your response, roughly, if you want to think of it that way. So we're getting into the first week of September already. There's no moisture. We're waiting for moisture. So will the response, if we're talking about getting back to normal, we want a normal response from stuff spread in early September. The best we could hope for would be sort of in around that 19 kilos of a response. And we might not even get that, so we might even have to drop that back to about, maybe 15, and we'll see the calculations is worth in a second. So really, it's probably a case of anything that was spread, past 3-4 weeks ago, you'd probably be topping it up with a light application, maybe 20 units, 23 units. But anything that's been spread probably the last 2 to 3 weeks, and very little growth since, I wouldn't be advising to spread again. Unless the paddocks are growing well. And again, I'm talking about a dry situation, just in case there's farmers in a different part of the country saying, what's he talking about? I'm talking about farms where, there's very little growth on the farms over the last 3 or 4 weeks. So
no nitrogen utilization has been there, basically, is what you're talking about, John.
Yeah, exactly. So just to quickly run through the cost of fertilizer, if it's urea, it's obviously a bit cheaper. Protected urea a little bit dearer, and canned is even dearer again. But look, roughly it's about €2.13 if you're just using your normal urea. €2.13 per kilo of nitrogen to buy a kilo of nitrogen. And if we're applying at 30 kilos, that's a rate of about 23 units or half a bag. It's going to cost about €64. Okay, so we'll just say €65 now to put out my half bag of urea. Okay. And if we're using protected urea, it's probably up to €70 for the same amount, and that's not including any cost for spreading. It's just the cost of the product. And can is looking like it's over €3 a kilo, which would be bringing it up to €90 a hectare. So actually spreading can this back end is definitely nearly out in terms of getting a response or making it worthwhile. So look, the return on value of the grass. So we know that the autumn grass is worth about 11 cents. And normal circumstances, we're not in normal circumstances at the moment. Prices have probably increased by about 40%. Therefore, the value of autumn grass increased similarly. So if we adjusted for that, we're talking about 15.5 cents per kilo, and that's not based on taking in what the price of milk is or the price of beef. That's just basically, it's a feed displacement figure. So I'm displacing silage and meal for grass. This is what the value of grass is worth. It's that much cheaper. So if we assume a response of 15 kilos, so remember I said about 19 for early September, we're assuming 15 because we're lower in moisture, etc.
Yeah.
So we do the sum there. Basically, we're getting €70 of value worth of grass back. Okay. Yeah. And if we look over back on the left hand side, we can see if we're using urea, it's costing 65. So our protected urea is just about breaking even. So it's a break even exercise, really spreading the fertilizer, Stuart. But obviously if you are maybe short on winter feed and stuff like that might come into it as well. But I'd be going back to, if I've spread the last 2 or 3 weeks, very little growth, I wouldn't be doing paddocks again. And if it's beyond that, I'd probably put on a light amount.
Yeah. Okay, so I suppose just to move on to the last bit, because I'm conscious that you're going to have to go, John, there now.
Yeah.
Just in terms of recommendations, and then John McCabe will pick it up, I suppose, after that. Now, there's actually a comment in here: can people stop talking about trying to build cover when we're basically desperately looking for every blade of grass? But it's still an important point that, like, we have to acknowledge, okay, that talking about the targets there for the middle of September, etc., they're gone. But we still have to have some objective in terms of trying to get to maybe that 1st of October cover, or as close as we can to get to it, in order to actually make sure we're going to have grass on the farm, or some level of grass on the farm, that we'll get some bit of grazing out of the month of October. Like,
I might let John run through those. Is John that target, Stuart? He can run through that afterwards. For any farm that you're after describing there that's struggling, it probably comes back to, it's in the recommendations. We're probably talking about holding 2 30-day rotations. So one 30-day rotation now will bring us up roughly to the 1st of October. The other one will bring us out to the 1st of November. And whatever grass grows on that, hopefully as much as possible, and we do get to build some cover to some extent, but whatever grass grows in that period, basically is any extra grass will be a benefit and will displace any sort of silage or meal that has to be fed. But, like, you know, if we can get up to a stage where we're grazing covers of 12, 13, 1400 again, like, that'd be brilliant, you know, on farms that are struggling now. You know, I think any of them would take that. And we have to remember, like, there is a lot of the country still that are growing well. Like Ballyhaise this week took out silage because they were way ahead of their autumn target. So, you know, it's amazing for a little country how much variation there is. But I might let John come back to the targets maybe.
Yeah, grand. Yeah, sure. You do you need to jump off there, so?
Yeah. So just look, I can quickly run through this. Setting up the farm for 30-day rotation. I think we all sort of know what it is. So it's not based on looking backwards. So it's not where did I graze a month ago. It's if you have a 30-hectare block, you split it into 30 and graze 1 hectare a day, and whatever else you need to feed in the interim to feed that, you put it in at whatever sort of way, silage, meal, other alternative meals or forages as well. You know, for a lot of farms in the East, it's going to be a case of a third, or 6 kilos of meal, 6 silage, 6 grass, or it might be something like 4 meal, 8 silage, 6 grass is sort of at the moment. You know, and probably hold there for the next couple of weeks, that if we do get rain, it might grow some grass for us. But look, I come back to the fodder budget. You know, if you're a lot of people will have used their month reserve of silage before they even get to the winter this year. Yeah. So if you only have a month reserve of silage, I would be looking at other options now. I wouldn't be waiting, because you don't know what the other end of the thing would be. Okay, yeah. Definitely have options, because you know there's no point leaving it to the last minute, right? You can be sure that a lot of farms are going to feed probably 4 to 8 kilos of silage for the next couple of months in a lot of cases, and even to hold that 30-day rotation. Okay, so I'd be banking on nearly the equivalent of 2 or 3 more weeks of full sort of silage, if you like, on some farms in the Leinster South region as well, in Cork as well, and stuff like that. So look at the options, you know, bringing grazing ground back in, drying off some cows, maybe sell some cows, whatever it has to be. It's going to be back to, you know, not what the milk price is. It could be back to how much feed do I have on the farm, really.
Yeah. So I'll leave you go, John, and switch to you, John McCabe, because I suppose you've a similar story but different in one way, maybe, John. And thanks to John Douglas for coming on there.
Thanks.
But you're like, so John, you're saying, we'll say you've had good growth, and actually, so you can pick up on a point here now. Brendan Healy's just asked, with average farm cover so low now, which is you're seeing some of that, but not a lot of it compared to what John Douglas is seeing there. And with the expected bounce predicted to get growth up to average growth for the time of year, are we actually looking at having to supplement heavy with silage and ration for the rest of the year to extend out grazing season and keep grass in the diet? And that's coming back to that person's point earlier as well about we're talking about trying to build cover, and there's nearly no grass on some farms at the minute, and might be getting under some people's skins. But in reality, we're trying to promote that there will be some level of grazing going on. So will you tell us what's the scenario in the West, and what are you seeing, and what are you advising up there now at the minute?
Yeah, so look, it's variable, but I think that's normal. So we've got some farms that are starting to slow down a little bit, but typically we're growing in the 50s to 60s. So I don't really want to pit the West against the East and the South here. and say everything's rosy up here, but things are fairly normal. If I could just come back to the point, to pick up on a point that one of the attendees has just asked there about average farm covers being so low now, and maybe looking about supplementing silage and meal for the rest of the year. I definitely support the idea of even going even in a bit harder when the rain does come, and if we get about bouncing growth, to try and get your average farm covers built up. And I know we have another attendee saying stop talking about building covers, but it really will be worth it, based on what we saw in 2018, in that the utilization should be very good for that kind of autumn period, if and when the rain comes. And it's just you want to keep grass in the diet, keep protein up, and keep cows out of the shed, basically. And look, it a little bit or hard feeding when the rain and the growth does come will actually pay itself back by the measure of 2 or 3 times in terms of silage fed or silage saved, if you can put in the silage and drop your demand when the growth comes. But yeah, look, back up to the west. Look, we're probably growing in around between 55 and 65. As I said, variable enough in that some farms I've seen growth rates of 30s and 40s, and similarly, one of our focus farmers there on the Arrivo joint program grew 105 last week, an unprecedented growth. He was actually behind in target and had to put in a bit of feeding, and he just got this freak growth. But I suppose it kind of comes back to the idea of autumn grass, that you have to extend out the rotation length. There's a reason we try to aim for 30 days and not continue on a 21-day rotation, and that is that the leaf, that third leaf, takes a lot longer to come out in the autumn when the day lengths get shorter. You get a leaf that, on the grass plant, come out every 7 days in the summertime. That's why we're on a 21-day round, whereas in the autumn. And I suppose, look, I think there's probably, while the scenario is good up here in terms of we're growing 50s to 60s, it's normal. There's probably a half to 2/3 of farms that are behind target in terms of where they are where they should be at for this day of the year. So kind of looking at my own pasture base and who I'm connected to, you're kind of talking average farm covers of around 800 is kind of where we're at. So 250 or 260 a cow with stocking rates at 300. So or stocking rates at 3. So look, that's obviously a completely different scenario to what's happening in other large swaths of the country. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that this is a national podcast, and the farmers across my territory, there's a risk of not hitting targets too. So I think I was just talking to a few farmers this morning, and they're starting to introduce a bit of silage and a bit of zero graze grass to try and get to slow the cows down, to get that rotation length out. And I think John's advice there on the 30-day rotation is it's good. Like two 30-day rounds, keep it simple. I think that applies no matter what part of the country you're in.
Yeah, so John, I suppose you're half fed into it now, but the comment has been made there. Would you recommend taking cows off the grazing platform if the weather does come to start driving on the growth, and that person is farm cover of a 400 at the minute? So I suppose just to explain the process to people. So we have a demand issue, obviously, that we can't supply the demand at the moment with grazed grass. You're saying that if we start to get growth, potentially, you're talking about feeding hard now. This person is asking, do you actually take them off completely and feed them full time inside? What's your thinking on that one?
I think it depends on where your stocking rate is on the platform, and what you're able to do with that. The first place I would look would be doing a milk recording and pulling out any cow that doesn't have the potential to milk much for the rest of the year. I think we all have them, and I think they need to go straight away. And then after that, maybe back to your question then, Stuart, on putting them in, let's say, maybe not as extreme as putting them in, but that's the thinking, that you really, really have to slow them down. And especially the later it gets into September, the slower that third leaf is going to emerge on the grass plant, and that means we really have to allow trying to attempt to get the pre-grazing up to over 14 or 1500 to allow any normalish growths to happen for the rest of the year. So yeah, look, it's about really slowing down. I suppose you would want to watch in terms of your fodder reserves, and I think John Douglas's point about doing a fodder budget is critical. It's not nice to have; it's actually it's essential to have. That's extremely important.
Yeah, so there's just a point there from Martin Deasy and Carrigaline now as well, just about maybe using a sacrifice paddock or something like that. So that would be tying in with maybe locking them up as such nearly and feeding hard for the 2 weeks, we'll say. So I suppose the concept there that people are looking at is maybe if you're growing 50 and you have a demand of 0, basically, you're going to multiply farm cover by quite rapidly, potentially, in that scenario. So there's a little bit of there's an argument for it, but the challenge is like the sacrifice paddocks and locking cows into the shed in the month of September in a month that we're hoping will be growthy. It could be a bit of a tricky one in terms of you're basically going to have to go into full winter mode and lining cubicles and cows inside, etc., running scrapers very frequently to make sure that milk quality will stay right as well, and that you won't have an absolute storm of mastitis maybe breaking out there. Like, so there's a bit of a fine balance there, and John, you're probably more in favour of, rather than the sacrifice paddock, maybe just a very small portion of grass every day, keeping the lid on the demand and letting the growth do its thing, basically.
I think another simple thing that has emerged over the last couple of years, last 5 or 6 years, is that some farms will just keep 2 rows in the shed, or a row in the shed, or 2 rows in the shed, and it'll be a different row. It might be the first row today, it could be the last row tomorrow, it could be one in the middle next, and so that's obviously depending on the size of your herd, but it's a portion of your cows. If you want to really slow down your demand or slow down your rotation length and drop your demand without fully housing the herd and having to, maybe if you're overstocked in your cubicle shed, that you kind of understock your cubicle shed so that there isn't a major risk of mastitis, and it's at that time of year, and that you just keep them in at night, or that there's certain
you're just manipulating your demand in different ways.
Manipulating your demand, but it's actually very simple.
Yeah, and I suppose the beauty there is that they're not all full-time silage then either. So like you said earlier about constituents staying up and so forth, that's going to have a contributory factor there. And feed space is probably a challenge sometimes on farms, because maybe farms are set up with the idea that they're going to be grazing grass, obviously, and not overly concerned about having to buffer or anything like that. So the idea of maybe swapping cows around and so forth, and it's very easily done, as you said, just keep the last row, couple of rows in, depending on what you're trying to do. It could be 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, whatever, depends on how many rows you have, etc. And they're just the first cows that go into the parlour the next milking, and they go to grass, and the last couple of rows are the rows that are kept in the next time. And you're kind of, now there could be some cows there that get silage. It could end up, maybe depending on the way they'd fall into the collecting yard in terms of pecking order, could end up on silage full time, but there could be cows that'll be on grass full time too. Like,
by and large, it'll be a mix, and it's a kind of a simple way of doing it. And actually, when talking to farmers who have done it, they find it doesn't add much time at all. It's actually, and it's easy on the cows that are in, and the cows that are out get more grass. So, or at least you're building grass on the farm. Just, I suppose, one point from just, I'm currently in the Teagasc office in Stranraer in County Donegal, and ground conditions are absolutely excellent for this time of year for Connacht and Ulster. We're looking at growth prediction next week of 59, and that's fairly accurate over the last number of weeks. So look, somewhere in the 50s to 60s is what we're looking at in terms of growth. It supports putting in some silage. Meals probably have increased already, so putting in some silage to try and build up that rotation length and stretch out the grass. There's a fear, I suppose, in some parts of the west of Ireland that when the rain does come, and it's a warranted fear in places, but when the rain does come, ground conditions get awful and we won't be able to utilise the grass. But I think we're starting in a great position here now, and if we can get out to that 30-day round, basically count up how many days or how many acres you've grazed over the last couple of days, and figure out how many acres a day that is, and divide your acres on the milking platform by the acres per day you're grazing, and that'll give you your rotation length. I had a group yesterday. Some people were on a rotation length of still of 20 days and finding it hard to build grass. So like it's probably normal in that we've about half to 2/3 that aren't hitting the target, and so I suppose advice for the people of Connacht and Ulster is if walk your farm, see where you are in terms of pre-grazing yield, and also look if your rotation length is at them below 25 days or below 27 or 8 days at this stage, you need to introduce more silage. And if it's a case of doing a milk cordon and getting rid of the kind of the cows that don't have the potential to do much more milk for the rest of the year, that's another option.
So yeah, John, I suppose we'll just wrap it up now. Final point there, Kevin Keller, I was just asking, is September grass in the diet not more beneficial than feeding it later on when it's full of water and cows are nearly dry? So that's one that I'm sure you're often challenged with, and even probably challenged more since you went further north than when you used to be down around the south maybe. But so ground conditions, obviously, as Kevin is saying, can become a challenge. But at the same time, like from the question, it's almost saying like, would you just not eat it now in September because it's going to be no good till later in the year? Is that the case?
I don't think so. I think it still supports getting cows out, getting look, just for even the health benefits from having the herd out by day. But look, the diet, if you can get grass into the diet, your protein is going to be, your constituents are going to be much better. And look, I think that it supports doing it this year. As we're looking at good milk prices, it'd be a shame not to be able to capitalize fully on that if by having cows in the shed from the 5th of October until whatever time next year. So yeah, no, definitely the science is still the same on what grass can do for you in the autumn.
Okay, super, John. We'll wrap it up with that. Look, folks, we're going to, because of the situation, I'm going to kind of leave it a bit fluid for next week. I haven't nailed down a topic just yet because we just want to try to be able to react maybe to situations to cater for people's needs if we can at all. So we'll just leave it open as to what we're going to pick up on next week. I'd like to thank John Douglas and John McCabe for joining me there this morning. And just for people that are in the kind of the Cashel area, Tipper area, if you happen to be tuned in this morning, there's a contract rearing walk on at Noel Farrell's in Golden this morning at 11 o'clock. If people wanted to pop over to that, there'll be plenty of information from Gordon and the local advisors there in relation to contract rearing if people are interested in it, which may be something that people may have to consider in relation to nitrates and so forth into the future. So look,
sure. If you're giving a plug, I might give a plug to two events we have up here.
No, you're not allowed to give plugs.
up in the west. So on the 13th of September, Tuesday the 13th of September, we've a Focus Farmer Walk in Tim Kelly's. We'll be looking at labour and lameness as well as Tim Kelly's performance. And then on the 15th, over in Westmeath, the 15th September, we're out with Joe McLaughlin, who's done a massive transition into clover this year. And Donald Patton from Ballyhaise is going to come up and have a chat through Joe's transition this year. So two good events coming up if anyone is in either Galway or Westmeath.
Okay, super stuff. Thanks to everyone for tuning in this morning, and we wish you well for the week. And we'll see you next week. Thanks again, and safe farming, everybody.
That's all for this week's Let's Talk Dairy webinar series. And don't forget to look out for more bonus episodes each week. I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and thanks for listening.